Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take up all the other bits inside the motherboard box. Could explain what they're used for. Shouldn't be too many. So, drivers, utilities. Yep. Nice sticker. Thanks for that. Things. Keep hold of the little manual or user guide. They'll have. Sometimes you quite often have to reference this or refer to this for various reasons. One being, for example, you had a bigger motherboard and you might have 4 RAM slots instead of 2, like this. If you only have 2 RAM sticks and 4 slots, it will tell you which ones to use to make sure you get correct dual channel. Dual channel with RAM basically means it's like having a 2-lane road, so you could sort of tend to do 2 data paths at the same time. If you put them the wrong way, you'll still get the correct amount of RAM, but they'll be sharing a lane, so it won't be as efficient. So, other things we get inside the box. We got our I/O shield. Do not forget about this. You could give yourself quite the headache if you forget about install this at the correct time. I'll make a point of this. Oh, that's quite shiny. I'll go for the case. Antennas, as this is a Wi-Fi board. Another thing, so that'd be convenient, right? And something we're going to need because of our build we have chosen today, using a SATA SSD. This is our SATA cable, which will connect our SSD, or if you end up using a hard drive, to our motherboard. I might use a slightly different one because I do have a shorter one. Is it much shorter? It's a little bit shorter. Okay. Which you know, quite often motherboards do come with a couple of SATA cables, which is nice. If you ever have to buy some, though, to be honest, they're very cheap, so it's not too big a concern. And there's a little screw in here. This would be used if you're going to mount an M.2 to the back of your motherboard, or anywhere in your motherboard, M.2 slot. Look out, the screw for it is usually hiding somewhere in the motherboard box. We're not using that today, so I could go back. In fact, the only bits I will need today. Will I use these antennas? I'll use these antennas. And the I/O shield. Right, the last piece of overview I'm going to do is I'll quickly go over the layout of items on the motherboard with the sort of rough name, a very relatively quick explanation for what they're for, and then we'll start with the build. So, nice little thing to point with. Never use fingers right. Always thinking green. So, in the centre here, we've got a big square blob. This is our CPU socket. This being an AM4 for Ryzen CPUs and a number of others. Not many, most of them tend to be Ryzen. And we'll go in a somewhat clockwise fashion around the board. So I have a mounting mechanism for it, for one style of cooler. There's a few ways that coolers can mount. I will show you 2 today. Here we have our fan headers. So one will usually be annotated for CPU, and then the rest will be either called system fan, or sometimes you'll hear ones that will mention a pump or something like that. So that's if you're using water cooling or an AIO. AIO is all in one, and that's referencing a water cooler which you mount the block on top and sorts itself out. You don't have to do a custom loop for it. So going around, our 2 long slots here are our memory slots. So this is for our DDR4 RAM. So keep moving round. You'll see a block of pins here. Sometimes they open like this, sometimes they have a shield, but that is for our USB Type 2. There is one other socket which looks very similar, which is for audio. I'll also explain. There's a difference between the 2. I'm just looking at another bit of the board, which will be easier to explain it on. And also there's usually something annotating that it's for USB. In our case here, you can see written on it, it just says USB. As we come to here in this big block, this is for USB 3. And this is a very different connector. Luckily, a lot of these connectors you can't put in the wrong spot, so you don't have to worry too much about that. If it feels like you're about to break something because you're forcing it in, you probably are. Here is our 24 power supply pin. This is power for the motherboard, which comes with a power supply. Here we have our SATA sockets for hard drives, SSDs, and even if you're going to use something like a CD drive or something like that. They've got little pins like this. This is for RGB. It's not very important. Well, you know, unless you think RGB gives you extra frames per second, then yeah, sure, why not. Here we have our PCIe ×16 slot. So this is what we're going to be using to mount our graphics card into. ×16 just says how many lanes it gets. So this large slot like this is usually a ×16, but sometimes they can be a ×8 as well. On bigger motherboards, you will also see other PCI slots which will be narrower than this, so they have less lanes and tend to have other functions, whether that's for a Wi-Fi card or extra storage or such like. But for a little gaming rig, 9 times out of 10, you're just going to use the slot and have no need for any others. Carry on moving around. There's one here which looks very similar to our USB socket that was up here, but you see that the missing pin is in a slightly different position. That's just because this is for our audio. So on the front of your case, where you normally have a headphone and microphone socket, the plug for that will in fact be here. Move around to this side of the motherboard. This is where our I/O will reside. I/O is referencing input/output. So this is where you'd have things like, so here's your audio. For those of you who are never sure, green is your headphone/speaker. Pink is usually your microphone. Wi-Fi, Ethernet, USB sockets type 3. DisplayPort and HDMI. This would be good if we were using something which had onboard graphics, which is one of the Ryzen processors which has a G annotation on it. So something like a 2400G. Then you would use these. Otherwise, for us, these are dead. A couple of USB 2 sockets and a PS2 if you is it PS2 socket? If you're using an old mouse and keyboard. And then lastly up here we've got another little small block like this. This is for our CPU power. On older motherboards or lower end motherboards you may see it with only a 4 brick. That is fine, but this board is capable of overclocking, so and even if ones that aren't, but the slightly higher end, they tend to be 8 nowadays. That's also a thing with the motherboard power socket. Sometimes you'll see ones that are only 20 rather than 24, but I've never seen one in the last forever. Okay, so I think that's most of our explanations of things gone over. I think we can move on to the construction of the actual... No! Stop ourselves. Because what we're actually going to do, and this is a wise decision, is a box test. A box test is we're going to build all the components as best we can sat on the box. It is not unheard of to get things brand new and it doesn't work. So rather than putting everything tirelessly into the case for it then not to work, we do it here now, and also building a certain amount of it, or most of the things you could put onto the motherboard outside of the case, saves us a lot of headache later on. So, we're going to start with the fitment of our CPU. I am going to put that box on top of the case to make it easier for you to see. There we go. So carefully taking the CPU out of its holder. This does have a little bit of old thermal paste on it. It is a used CPU of mine. So, making sure if it is used, make sure we've got a nice clean surface at the top. You can use methylated spirits or isopropyl alcohol to clean that off. Try and avoid things like antibacterial wipes and stuff like that, because they leave a film, so that will reduce its conductivity. So this side of the CPU, pretty hardy, you don't have to worry about that. This side of the CPU of all these pins, so on AMD CPUs, the pins are on the CPU, so you need to be careful when handling this. bent CPUs are a very good way of killing a CPU. Though they can be repaired, but let's avoid that. Intel CPUs have pads and the pins are on the motherboard, so they have the opposite problem. You'll notice on the corner of the CPU there's a little golden triangle. That will match up with, on the motherboard socket, it's very hard to notice on this camera, but on that corner there's another little indented triangle. So we know which way the CPU sits in the socket. So in this case, this way. For AMD, I'll probably have to do a video later showing Intel, but for AMD, you'll have a little arm like this, which you just unhook and rest till it's fully up. And then place the CPU and just drop it like that. It should require no pressure. None whatsoever, don't need to press, shouldn't really wobble, it should just fall in. Once it's fallen in, you feel a little bit of resistance as you push this back down. It's a very mild resistance, and you just hook it underneath there. Look at that, CPU fitted. I'm going to quickly go over now if you're going to fit the standard Wraith cooler, Wraith Stealth, and then I'll actually fit the other cooler I intend to use. But as that's one that comes free of the box, which if you are going down the budget route, it is a perfectly functional cooler, so there's no reason why not. So most AMD motherboards will come with these little sort of hooks pre-attached. Just need to unscrew them. While I'm doing this, I'll mention if you do go along and get your own aftermarket cooler, they will come with their own instruction how to fit. There's not very much a universal way of mounting coolers, unless, for example, on AMD, a lot of coolers will also use these hooks, but a lot don't. And once we've removed that, as you can see, this cooler comes with its own threads, so we can line them up and then screw down. It's spring pressured, and we'll do that with all the screws. And then with our CPU fan, plug that into our CPU fan header. Now there's one thing I didn't do before doing this, which was apply thermal paste. I was merely just going over the process of attaching this fan. I'll probably have to use the magic of editing to flip this the other way around. So I'm going to reattach our hooks. So, hooks in place. Before I put on our CPU cooler, we need to apply thermal paste. The application of thermal paste can be somewhat a controversial topic for how much or little you should use. So if you use too little, you in theory won't get enough coverage over the integrated heat spreader, which is the top part of the CPU, and you might not get all the cooling performance you'd hope for. If you use a bit too much, it can get a bit messy, it'll spread out over the sides, and you'd have to clean up afterwards. That's about it. So I tend to lean on, add a little bit more, the worse is have to clean it, but I want everything staying as cool as possible. How much you need, however, is about a large grain of rice, I would say. So something like that. You do not need to do anything more special than that. Applying the CPU cooler itself will spread it out for you. The thermal compound I'm using is RTX MX2, which a tube like this size can be had for I think about £3 on Amazon, and is absolutely fine. You can obviously pay more for better cooling, but performance, but we're talking single digit degrees here, and even not a great amount. If you're trying to do overclocking and stuff like that, it might be considered useful, but by and large, don't worry about it. So, the other way that coolers can be mounted AMD is via these hooks. So you see on our cooler here, got one hook like this side, and one this side with an arm. And all it will do is, once we've got both hooks over long, it will cause better pressure by turning this over. So we'll hook over the top side, like this. I'm trying to keep it relatively even as straight as possible for resting it down. Hook on the other side, like so, and then lever this down. And done! We fitted our cooler. For future now as well, this is also a great place to handle picking up and handling our motherboard. You see it's not moving, nice solid block of metal, perfectly fine to do that. And we'll go ahead and plug this into our CPU fan socket. And try and shove away these cables somewhere out of the way. Perfect. Next easy convenient thing to install is our memory. Pretty easy to insert. You look on the motherboard, either it'll be at both ends or at one end. There's a part you can open. Because of a little cut-in, there's only one way around you can fit it. And you slide it down and press very firmly until it clicks like so. It is quite a firm press, and it's fine as long as you do it evenly. So nice and easily, and then firm press. There we go. This would also be a great time if we're going to fit an M.2 to fit that to the motherboard as well. And if you already know it's all working, then you can put it in the case, but we are going to put it together and do a little box test so you can see that. So other things I'm just going to easily connect to make sure they're working. I've got my case fan, so I can put this in the case fan header here. Fit. This end of a module power supply, this is for the motherboard power. So 24 pin is a very firm fit. Again, so try and push it in evenly. Really give you quite a lot of pressure to fit it in and click. CPU. Now, a lot of these connectors, you cannot accidentally put them into the wrong one. They have little bricks and such like in place to prevent you from doing so. No, I was right first time. Like so. A somewhat unthemed shocking blue SATA cable. I'm using this one because it's shorter and it's also right angled. But I think unfortunately right angled the wrong way. Not this for this side. Okay, fine. So to fit them to the motherboard, you'll see there's an L shape and an L shape in the socket, and it's just a firm press. And to fit onto a hard drive or SSD, it is the same. It's the same. They work both ways. And we'll power that SSD. So this is a SATA power connector, and you can almost see it's the same sort of design, just larger. Got like a Tetris L shape in it again, and just a firm press. Our graphics card going into the PCIe slot. There's usually some device at the back which allows you to lock it in or open it to release it. And much like everything else you've seen, it is merely a firm press in. And you'll hear it click with the lock at the back, like so. That will also need power. Now with graphics cards, they can have anywhere from no external power to one 6-pin, one 8-pin, a 6-pin and an 8-pin, 2 8-pins, 3 8-pins. All sorts, so that's very specific depending on your graphics card, though most modern ones now are running a lot of these connectors to power them. Right, well, minus the motherboard bits to go to the case, that is enough for us actually to do a bench test. Apologies if it goes a bit dark, I'm actually going to have to nick power from one of the lights to be able to do this for us. Now you can either temporarily use a case switch, or to power it on, you'll have, so what we're going to do, we're going to short front panel connector, which is this block down here. Normally at the bottom right of the motherboard, but little ITX motherboards, they just have to squeeze everything wherever they can. Thanks to our notes and a little motherboard book, we know it's pin 6 and 8 for the power switch. So what we could do, we could just touch them together, and look, life. Yes, this would be a very good time to put it into display as well, and make sure it gets to the BIOS and posts. Post is the term basically saying that everything's worked together and it's got to the BIOS. But we'll worry about the details of that in a later video. But this would be a good time, yeah, to put it to a screen, see what it's saying and doing. But I'm content that there, it's powered up, the fan's ramped up and then calmed down. Which is usually a good sign. So, we've done our box test, we know everything's working, we don't have to send back to manufacturer, we can start putting things in the case. So for now, I'm just going to pretty much build this underneath the camera. I'll say some of my thoughts as I'm doing certain bits, as they might be useful to someone who's watching. Yeah, so let's get turned off the power supply, unplugged everything from there. So I'm going to start removing components. So to remove most of these power cables, you can see it's just a little press hook there to remove it. Move our graphics card, push that tab down and lift out. There we go. We've got SATA. This one's just friction fit, but you also get SATAs which have a little press tab on them as well. I tend to find removing and fitting these 24-pin panels very, very stiff. That one wasn't so bad. Remove our CPU pin and our case fan. Okay. Clear ourselves a little bit of space. So, we're finally going to put stuff in the case. Back of the case, I'm trying to keep this general here rather than making it very specific to this case. The case will usually, you'll only have to remove one side, which will either have 2 thumb screws or 2 Phillips screws. This one being a slightly different shape, it has 4 screws holding it on. Again, building in each of the cases, there will be a manual that will usually come with the case explaining how the nuances of building inside that case. I got this because it's a relatively small case. I managed to get this used actually for £20, but I believe new they go for £40, which is still a very good price for a case of this level of functionality and size. So we are going to go ahead and also remove the front, because I will need at some point to fit the case fan. Just for reference, all screws that are used, there's only really a small set of screws that are used throughout the entirety of these things, so they might look slightly different or different colours and mildly different shapes, but by and large you'll only ever encounter 3, maybe 4 different screws. So if you do end up losing any or something like that, it's not usually a big ordeal to replace them. Okay, now the one thing I said about not forgetting during our build, one of the first things you want to do once you've got your case out, your motherboard's I/O shield. Fit this now. Why am I saying it like that? Because once you fit all the components and you realise you've forgotten to do that, it's a rather painful backtrack to go along and take everything out just to press this in. New high-end motherboards are starting to come with the I/O shields as on the back of the motherboard permanently attached. But a lot of them will still be very much like this. To put them in, line them up, press on the inside very firmly. They're very firm to click in place. Once we've done that, hold them by the collar, we can then lift in our motherboard. You'll see inside the case you'll have standoffs which the motherboard will sit on. They're normally in place for what's the most common kind of motherboard you put in there. So small like this is set up ready for an ITX board. Bigger, slightly bigger cases, they might be set up for MATX. Very big cases tend to be set up for ATX. There are other standards, but they're very rare and not usually catered for. So don't worry about them so much. So once it's in line, we'll screw in our motherboard screws. So as most things, engineering mentality when fitting of screws is try and do them in a sort of cross or opposites. So we've done our box test, we know everything's working, we don't have to send back to manufacturer, we can start putting things in the case. So for now I'm just going to pretty much build this underneath the camera. I'll say some of my thoughts as I'm doing certain bits, as they might be useful to someone who's watching. Yeah, so let's get turned off the power supply, unplugged everything from there. So I'm going to start removing components. So to remove most of these power cables, you can see it's just a little press hook there to remove it. Move our graphics card, push that tab down and lift out. There we go. Move our SATA. This one's just friction fit, but you also get SATAs which have a little press tab on them as well. I tend to find removing and fitting these 24-pin panels very, very stiff. That one wasn't so bad. Remove our CPU pin and our case fan. Okay. Clear ourselves a little bit of space. So, we're finally going to put stuff in the case. Back of the case, I'm trying to keep this general here rather than making it very specific to this case. The case will usually, you'll only have to remove one side, which will either have 2 thumb screws or 2 Phillips screws. This one being in a slightly different shape, it has 4 screws holding it on. Again, building in each of the cases, there will be a manual that will usually come with the case explaining how the nuances of building inside that case. I got this because it's a relatively small case. I managed to get this used actually for £20, but I believe new they go for £40, which is still a very good price for a case of this level of functionality and size. So we are going to go ahead and also remove the front, because I will need at some point to fit the case fan. Just for reference, all screws that are used, there's only really a small sector of screws that are used throughout the entirety of these things, so they might look slightly different or different colours and mildly different shapes, but by and large you'll only ever encounter 3, maybe 4 different screws. So if you do end up losing any or something like that, it's not usually a big ordeal to replace them. Okay, now the one thing I said about not forgetting during our build, one of the first things you want to do once you've got your case out, your motherboard's I/O shield. Fit this now. Why am I saying it like that? Because once you fit all the components and you realise you've gone to do that, it's a rather painful backtrack to go along and take everything out just to press this in. New high-end motherboards are starting to come with the I/O shields as on the back of the motherboard permanently attached, but a lot of them will still be very much like this. To put them in, line them up, press on the inside very firmly. They're very firm to click in place. Once we've done that, hold them by the collar, we can then lift in our motherboard. You'll see inside the case you'll have standoffs which the motherboard will sit on. They're normally in place for what's the most common kind of motherboard you put in there. So small like this is set up ready for an ITX board. Bigger, slightly bigger cases, they might be set up for MATX. Very big cases tend to be set up for ATX. There are other standards, but they're very rare and not usually catered for. So don't worry about them so much. So once it's in line, we'll screw in our motherboard screws. So as most things, engineering mentality when fitting of screws is try and do them in a sort of cross or opposites fashion. As for how tight, pretty much till you stop turning. There's next to nothing in here, no screw that needs to be very tight. It's just not a thing. So you'll see, normal screw, I'll just do that, that's fine. Nothing in here goes through enough vibrations or pressure or anything like that to warrant anything's being screwed in very, very tightly. It's just don't. You're just going to strip threads or shear it or something like that. It's not necessary. That's our motherboard fitted. I'm going to try and build this now in a sort of logical way, depending on how things are going to be easy to fit. So the next thing I'm going to put in is probably our SSD. I can move out of the way now. So this has got a very convenient mount. There are other methods of mounting this, and even this case has, but because it's got a very nice convenient one just on the base at the bottom here, I'm going to use that. If you're doing a hard drive, you'll quite often see you'll have little rubber mounts for these things, as they are sensitive to knocks and vibration and such like. SSDs, hard knocks, obviously nothing likes that, but by and large they're pretty hardy things. You can just hard screw them like this and they'll be fine. Yes, I'm only using 2 screws. These those SSDs weigh absolutely nothing, and that will be firmly in place there, no problems at all. I could probably get away with fitting our SATA cable now while nothing's in the way, and seeing if there's somewhere I can possibly route that so neatly out of the way. As to which SATA port you use, for our build here today, it really won't matter. But in some, so another build I have, if you use the M.2 slot for an NVMe drive or such like, that will turn off potentially some of the other SATA sockets. So bear that in mind. Again, that will be in your motherboard booklet, if that is the case. Okay, so I think next what I'm actually going to do, when nothing else is in here and in the way, is I'm going to attach all the front I/O. So our case here will have a power switch, LED light, headphone socket, microphone socket, and 2 USB 3 sockets. What does this look like when I connect on the other sides? So we have our USB 3 socket. This, as you can see by its designation, is our HD audio, so that's for our microphone and headphones. Our USB 2 socket will also look exactly the same as this, but it will have a blank out in one of the corners instead. And then we also have here our other bits for the front. So we've got our power, they are labelled up as such. You've got your power switch, your power LED, hard drive LED, and reset switch. Reset switch and power switch, it doesn't matter, polarity is irrelevant, just get them on the correct pins. LEDs do need to be on the correct polarity. Again, you'll need to reference your motherboard booklet as to which pins you need to plug into. And on bigger motherboards where there's more space, they quite often have the layout of what pin does what next to it as well on the actual PCB. PCB is the naming of the actual material which everything is built onto. So once again, what I need to see is 1 and 2. So 1 and 3 is hard drive LED, 2 and 4 is power LED. So I could do myself a favour here. So I could get the correct bricks. Will they reach? Or am I going to have to uncouple them? Ow, pointy. I'm going to have to crop them off. bit more length. So back to our booklet. So positive is 1 and 2, 3 and 4 will be negative. So what I can do here, positive being the orange, so I know that needs to go that way, and hard drive 1 is 1, so that's at the bottom. Apparently this one being a positive, I can hold it like a sort of 4 brick like that, and then press that into the slot. I appreciate you probably won't be able to see very much here as I'm doing this. This is, in a funny sort of way, these front connectors are possibly the most fiddly and difficult part of the build physically to do. But we got that. Superb. So now we just need to do our... So reset switch is 5 and 7. Power switch is 6 and 8. So we could do much the same trick actually. So reset will go on the bottom, power switch will go on the top. And we perform much the same trick. Trying to get myself a bit of slack here. Have they come out now? That's no good. I wonder if I could do as a big 8 brick. You know what, I'm going to do that. Big 8 brick like this. So if we get all of them in at the same time. I may be tempted to try and tape them together like that. See how this goes. Oh, did I do it? We're in, we're cooking with coal. Don't know idea of how to manage the cable run that neatly. Well, luckily you don't really see much on the inside of this case from the outside. So, well, we'll go to the other ones anyway. So, audio, and this is actually how USB 2 sockets fit as well. They're much easier. Just line up and press it. Look at that. For USB 3, big block like this, I'll say easy to press in like this. Just a little bit of firm press and does that. Be conscious, this socket, you can see it wobbling here, I have known it to break. So a little bit of TLC when physically handling that socket. Right, while I've got the front off, I'm going to mount our front fan, and then I can put the front of this back on. So your normal standard size fan is 120mm. Whether you come for case fans, some coolers would use that as well. 120mm, and what your wall cooling ones do and such like that. This case can support 140mm, so it will just give me better airflow. And I believe to do that, let's just do a little test fit. I'll go there like that. So, when fitting case fans, out, don't pull out, don't pull out, don't pull out. The main method you'll have of mounting is a self-tapping Phillips one that will just screw into the fan itself and you're done. If you've got an MRKFour rad, that will have its own screw which is elongated. Again, I'll probably have to do that for a future video. Or the other one you could do as well is you've got anti-vibration sort of rubber kind of mounted fan holders, which is actually what I'm going to attempt to use today. It's less common to have that. You'd normally have a self-tapping screw. I'll find one for example. There we are, like so. And you'll just literally just screw that in again, just to, it kind of stops. It doesn't need to be tight. The fans don't weigh a lot, they don't cause a lot of vibration or much pressure, these will be fine. I'm going to attempt to use these anti-vibration ones today, a little bit out of curiosity for myself. Help make things just technically a little bit quieter as well, we'll see. If not, if they don't work, then we'll go through and use the normal fans. Now normally to fit these, I don't know which holes this use, you just pull these in place. Of where the fan will be, like so. So mounted to the case, and then when he's got this little elongated extrude, whatever you want to call them, keep it clean. And we pull them through so they're physically pulled in tight. Keep in mind there is an extra added level of difficulty when building in a small case such as this. If you're building in much larger ATX cases or your very standard kind of office looking case, your builds will be much easier, and there's plenty of YouTube videos online to follow them if you want to see what it would look like building if you've gone for a much more standard case. I showed a video of one like this because a small ITX case for servicemen and women is much more convenient size for moving, whether it's just because you're moving home and don't want a big thing to move around, or you're the kind of person that goes on courses a lot and such like, and you want to take your computer with you, because much better performance than a laptop by and large. Okay, so as you can see, that's now nice firmly fitted in place. There's a little bit of movement because the idea being is those rubbers will now absorb the vibration, and that will give us our airflow into the case. With that done, we can mount this. What I'm going to try and do is pull some of the excess wiring from USB 3 header. No, it doesn't want to do that. Fine, have it your way. Problems for later. There we go. Okay. Right. I've got a lovely long gangly wire here to wrap up. So, numbers away for cable management. You've got your old school cable ties, you use electrical tape. I've also got a good stack of sort of Velcro based cable ties like this. If you're on a budget and you've got much stuff to hand, as you're getting your new components and things like that, you make these little wire tabs, you get out a lot of things, keep hold of them. These are fantastic. Even if we use cases like this where I don't really need a Velcro tab to tidy up everything, because it's quite independent, it can live by itself, so I could just have that run around to our case fan header there. And all this excess I can neatly loop up like that, grab a twist, twist it together, and neatly tuck that out of the way. Little things like this are really useful in little ITX builds like this, because it's very easy to start having a great big mess of stuff getting in the way. So as you're going, you want to always try and make sure your cables are as conveniently out the way as possible. Right, next I'm actually going to do, before I run out of space to do so, I'm going to start, this is much easier for me because I'm using a modular power supply. I'm going to start plugging in a power to these components. This is possibly one I should have done earlier. Get that underneath there out of the way. Have I got the L the right way round? So L needs to go downwards. It was the correct way round. Ah, there, in. Why don't I do that with all of them? Why don't I do that with all of them? Part of the graphics card, there's no point in doing it with the graphics card one much. So it's motherboard power. CPU power. It's quite fiddly there, isn't it? Okay. No, I might have just made an error. Because I did have to modify this graphics card slightly. As you'll see, I've had to cut off the end of the shroud on this side to get it to fit into this case. The reason I'm saying I might have made a mistake is because last time I fitted it by... Can I not have this thing in it with 120mm? 140mm even? I can't. Bother. Okay. Good news. You wanted to see it with a 120mm fan anyway, didn't you? Not 140. No, not 140mm fan. You don't want to see that. You want to see it fitted with a 120mm fan. They're common. Alright. Unfortunately, once you've got these ones on, and if to pull them out, it's just like this. Sometimes they will snap. Not a lot we can do about that. Okay. So, now we've worked out that with our graphics card we cannot fit a 140mm fan. Here we've got a 120mm fan, a more standard size. So this is a Noctua NFP12 Redux. Normally they're brown, but I think the Redux makes them, these are sort of more grey. These are not, if I'm honest, a budget-friendly fan choice. Noctua fans are great, don't get me wrong. They do fantastic work, they're very quiet. But you do pay for it. If you're going for more of a budget-minded kind of fan choice, I could comfortably recommend either Deepcool, that makes some really good cheap fans. Arctic makes some really good cheap fans. They tend to be no frills, no RGB or anything like that. And Be Quiet. Really good sort of price to performance fans as well. But there are many others. And I'm actually just going to use the original screws this time. To mount this one. I'll probably have an edited down version of this build. The reason I'm using the screws is because this fan already comes with rubber pads for anti-vibration, so it seems a bit pointless to then use the anti-vibration tabs, or whatever we're going to call them. What do they even call them? Anti-vibration bolts. Well, they're not bolts. So, I need to think of a better name. So, like nubbin. Anti-vibration nubbin. Main thing to note when fitting fans to a case like this and stuff like that is direction of which it will manipulate air. If you cannot tell by which way the fan is, which way it will move air, on the side of the fans here they'll usually have an arrow which will tell you which way the direction of the air is going to be pushed. I think I have to do this in 2 videos. I'll probably do one as the sort of straight build like this so people can see that. Sometimes not everything goes smoothly and that's okay. You just keep going, you work around it, you adapt and it's fine. And then I'll probably do a very clean instructional video with the least amount of complications. So that would make for an easier guide to step-by-step follow. I think that's a good idea actually. Right. See, Noctua even like braid the fan cables and stuff. They are very good fans. I would probably go with anything, if there's a normal case or something like that, I would probably use something else with a good amount of confidence. The reason I'm picking Noctua for this one is it's the only fan in this case. There's only room really for one intake fan, not much else. I'm going to take advantage of its braid and I'm just going to hide it underneath the motherboard and do that there. There we go, look at that. Lovely. Yeah, since I've only got one fan, I'm going to make it probably the best fan I've got to hand. And well, that's about it really. Okay. Now if you don't want to mod and stuff like that, whenever you get a case it will always tell you the maximum size of, you know, what graphics card you can fit in it, size of cooler and these kind of things. So you would probably buy a shorter graphics card. However, I'm using a graphics card I've got to hand. And in the current climate it's hard to get your hands on graphics cards anyway, so I probably wouldn't be able to easily get another graphics card. You see where I've cut it down here, it's just gonna fit. But you'll get plenty of cold air from this side of the case, and it'll be exhausted either out here at the back, somewhere out over the top, because the top of the case is vented, and even out the front of the case. So, GPU wise, it's going to have pretty good thermals in this thing. Right, now we can put this thing back on. In your PCI slots like this, there's usually some sort of cover, and the vast majority of the time it will just be screws that you don't normally have something like this. This is unique to this case, but and you normally just have 1 or 2 or 3 screws depending on the size of whatever you're mounting into the PCI slot holding it down. Some cases do have a proprietary method which actually are quite nice, don't get me wrong, but it's very rare that's a thing. You only tend to see that if you're doing like a super budget build and you're building like an old Dell or HP or something. If you're interested in seeing something like that, let me know. I'll show you how to take something like an old Dell PC and turn that into an entry-level gaming rig. Yep, like any good squaddy does, they work with a brew in their hand. Right, so minus the power supply, that's everything in. So what I'm going to do now, I'll be resting my power supply here. This could fit the power supply both this way, showing the fan to the top, where it'll be getting cold air out of the top of the case, and just exhausting it out the back, so that'll keep your power supply lovely cool and quiet. Or, and the way I'm probably going to fit it is this way. The reason I'm doing that is once all the cases are on the sides and stuff like that, there's not much happening in the way of exhaust. It's all just, it's a positive pressure case, it's requiring positive pressure and therefore having negative pressure on the outside of the case just to let the heat kind of come out. Whereas if I have this facing the inside, this also acts as somewhat as an exhaust. This setup shouldn't produce anywhere near enough heat to scare this power supply from getting too hot. So I'm not overly worried about that happening. Now where that CPU cable is, I'm going to have to route that a bit. It needs it, I think. Something like that. Because once I've worked out where these are all going to sit, I can then Velcro tie them in a neat place to keep them still. No obvious obstructions, happy with that. Okay. Okay, happy with that. Power supplies always tend to be held in place with 4 screws. You will fit a power supply in place with 4 screws. They are one of the biggest and heaviest parts of your PC, so if you're moving around or transporting it and stuff like that, this is one of those components that could just rip out of place and start rattling around your PC. You don't want this. Some things you could get away with leaving out a screw or two, so your motherboard, say hard drives to extend. Definitely fans, 2 screws for each fan is actually fine. But there are things that you don't do that with, and the 2 big ones is your power supply and your graphics card, because they tend to be the heaviest fitting, or the heaviest in your system. And well, power supply, yeah, your heaviest, and your graphics card also tends to be one of the least secure in your system. So bear that in mind when transporting. If you're going to transport, the safest thing to actually do is just take out your graphics card, put it back in its box or in something safe to transport, and then move it. So you'll see, I'll screw that into the 4 points there for our power supply, but you can see there's a slightly different shift in place of the holes, and that's if you flip the power supply the other way around. Okay, so what we'll do, the other advantage of a modular, actually, especially if you're doing a small build like this, is you can buy, or even pay to have it custom made for you if you want, shorter cables. It's actually how I got my hands on this power supply for a very good price. Someone bought this, bought custom cables for it, bought custom cables for the wrong power supply for a different manufacturer, and it was actually cheaper to rebuy the correct power supply than it was to rebuy new cables. So this had been only worked for about a couple of hours and then sold on to myself. Right, so where I've got extra bundles of cable here, what I want to do is keep them away neat, but if I can, out of the way of the fan's flow as much as possible. So these ones, I think, I might strap them together like that. Again, this is where you could use your cheap ties, or because I have these, I'm going to use these Velcro ties like this. I think that one I can then get to sit on the top. Out the way. And then these ones, I think I'll strap them together like that as well. And I'll see if I could just get them to rest just up here, actually behind the power supply. So while I appreciate from the top, this just looks like I've just wrapped a ball and kept it here. But the reason I'm doing that is most of it's now out of the way for the path of, ooh, apart from that one, forgot about that one. Just pull you up here and I'll attach you to one of the other cables. Like that. Oh, that's a good route for that. On normal PCs, cable management's much easier, you just hide it behind one of the back panel usually, or your excess and the such like. We don't have that luxury here. We have to get inventive with where we shove and hide our cables. There we go. So there we go. It's got a nice clean flow over our motherboard components, air going to the CPU cooler, and straight to our power supply so as well. And our graphics card will get its own fresh air from this side of the case. So, let's put our cover on. Cables lurking here, not too bad, we'll just squeeze them in. I don't think they're worth fighting over. And that's slid forward with very little resistance, that's good. One of those moments I could do with being Vishnu with many, many hands. And there we have it. Our little RTX build. So I'll do a future video showing its performance, thermals and the such like, and I'll probably also do another video on how to set up the BIOS, and probably another one with installing Windows. If this is the kind of content you want to see on this channel, then by all means leave what you'd like to see or see more of, or we'll go into more detail of in the comments down below. You can also contact myself on Discord, both the Army and Remy on MRKFour, and thank you very much. I'll see you next time.